Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the Vince McMahon docu-series on Netflix. This 6-part series features episodes that run for about an hour each, totaling 6 hours of compelling content. For this review, I'll be taking a podcast-style approach, so feel free to play the episode as we go along. I hope you enjoy this in-depth look at the docu-series, and I'll be discussing it even further during my live stream tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Warning: this docuseries will mention abuse, sexual assault, drug use, and more. Please be advised.
We are on episode 4 of the Mr. McMahon docuseries, and this one is called Attitude. Aptly named Attitude because this was the beginning, the bubbling, the rumblings of the Attitude Era. It was born out of frustration and the need to create new stars and lead the legacy of WWE into a new era after Bret Hart and Mr. McMahon had made the decision to part ways. But in doing what he did, he essentially created the titular character of Mr. McMahon, the front man of all evil within wrestling, professional wrestling more specifically. And in this case, with the interview that he did after he was subsequently knocked out by Bret Hart after Bret Hart was screwed over in the Montreal Screwjob, Mr. McMahon doubled down on his efforts and basically said, Bret screwed Bret. Outside of kayfabe, like I said in the previous episode, I don't believe that the fault was on either side. I believe that there's equal opportunity that can be spread around to both. Vince McMahon could have done a better job at protecting Bret Hart as well as protecting the kayfabe of the business, but also he could have still screwed Bret and made this into a thing where maybe Shawn Michaels beat him up to the point where he couldn't perform anymore, and then he's gone and Vince can be out there holding up his hand, and this could be a situation of the birth of Mr. McMahon as well as the rebirth of WWE and the new era that they're being led into. There were many ways and many routes that Vince McMahon could have chosen, and this is the one that he chose. And my brain is telling me that he did this on purpose, because once he realized that he was getting all this heat, the dream of him being a performer and entertainer for the masses was finally coming to fruition. Now, on the other side with Bret Hart, his stubbornness, his hard-headedness, and his need to be the guy even in his absence was crazy to me. You were leaving. Just take the pin and go home. You were going to WCW anyway. I didn't understand his arrogance in this moment. You were unprofessional, in my opinion, and I'm sorry, I don't side with anyone. I see it from both sides. With that being said, Mr. McMahon used this as a catalyst to launch the character of Mr. McMahon, the evil tyrant boss that controlled everything within WWE. Careers, paychecks, championships, anything you can think of, Mr. McMahon was in control of. I will say this. Eric Bischoff gave you the blueprint, and Mr. McMahon, ever the smart late mover, took it and ran with it. And after a while, that became the seismic shift of what WWE could possibly become, and the Attitude Era was born. Now, according to Triple H, a lot of people believe the Attitude Era just kind of leaped into fruition, but that's not the case. What happened was, to give you further explanation of the birth of Attitude Era, it was slow and it was little things. So there was one instance where Shawn Michaels came out there in biker shorts and he put gauze in his pants to insinuate that he had a enlarged male member. And then he was out there gyrating and dancing, and Vince was not backstage that night, so he had a little bit of freedom to do something crazy on TV. And Shawn Michaels, being the very good-looking man that he was and still is in his old age, he's a nice-looking man, pretty eyes, whatever. Anyways, he drew a lot of ire, more specifically from the female fans, of course. And the guys just thought it was fucking cool and funny because it was a dick joke. Guys love dick jokes. This didn't sit well with Vinnie Mac, okay? Vince McMahon was like, bitch, hold on. I leave for 5 minutes and you motherfuckers come out here with your dicks out? Like, what is going on? What is happening here? Okay? No. You're going to be fined $10,000, okay? You don't do that shit again. But he was like, hey, when you look back at it, let me know if you thought that was funny. Vince was like, it was entertaining. It was entertaining. And then that following week, he comes back and he's like, Shawn Michaels is attitude. That's what we need. We need attitude. And then he got the brilliant idea that there needed to be a change in the WWE because the days of the Brooklyn Brawler and the Doink the Clown and the Gobbler were over. They needed to appeal to a young audience, but that audience that liked that edge, that spitfire, that spunk. The young adults, that 18 to 35 demographic. That's who they were appealing to now. It was fuck the kids. Let's get this shmoney, okay? And so there were a lot of people that were born from the Attitude Era. DX were coming in, taking over, and they were very much anti-authority. 2 members of the clique had now come in and were taking over WWE, and they did everything in their power to push the envelope, from flashing their ass cheeks on TV to getting women to flash their tits. Just a lot of mess and innuendo. And then Stone Cold Steve Austin enters the picture, and well, the money is rolling in. Now, Stone Cold Steve Austin had been on the wrestling circuit for quite some time, but he never thought that he would be that successful. He didn't think that, some guy from Victoria, Texas could take it and be at the top of the mountain, but his foul-mouthed blue-collar ways appealed to a massive audience. And if you notice, every 10 years, a blue-collar, average-looking guy is the one who always gets the gold. He's the one who always has the backing of the fans at every single point in his career. They are behind you 100%. If you notice, this happened often in certain eras in WWE's time. For Stone Cold's time, for the Attitude Era, it was Stone Cold. For the later Ruthless Aggression era, it was CM Punk. And then in the PG era, it was Daniel Bryan. Every era has their blue collar, down to earth hero, somebody that is relatable to them. And in the Attitude Era, it was none other than Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, as Austin was the guy who was chosen, Austin did work for WCW, and he moved in to ECW after he was fired from WCW. And one thing about Paul Heyman is that he understood the game in long terms. I believe Paul Heyman was more focused on the superstars than the actual company of ECW overall. He felt superstars were going to come and go and maintain themselves however they could. If money was better in a different company, he was okay with that. But we don't know, Paul Heyman had his sleazeball moments as well. But we'll talk about that on another day. What we're talking about now is Vince McMahon and his war with WCW, which was still going on, by the way. WCW seemed to be doing well, but WWE seemed to be creeping up behind WCW. Now, when it comes to Stone Cold Steve Austin, he was able to build himself up on his own volition. The promos cut, everything that he was doing, all that came from him. And he essentially cut his promo, said what he needed to say, but the way it got started was he had a match prior because he was chosen to win King of the Ring due to Triple H being punished for the Garden curtain call. And so because Austin was chosen, Austin ended up hearing Jake the Snake cut a promo on him after a match. He had gotten injured in the match, had to immediately leave an ambulance, go get sewn up, and then he had to come back and have a match with Jake the Snake Roberts. And Jake the Snake Roberts cut a very religious promo on Stone Cold Steve Austin. So after Stone Cold Steve Austin won the match, he went up and sat down to gain his crown and become king of the ring. And then he goes into this promo where he says he was thumbing through his Bible and praying to his God, and look where it got you. And he said you read your Psalms and your John 3:16s, but Austin 3:16 says I just whipped your ass. And that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so. And that was the moment that the Stone Cold Steve Austin we know was birthed, because right after that, the massive Stone Cold Steve Austin sign appeared in the audience, and Stone Cold Steve Austin overnight was an overnight sensation, and one of the biggest superstars was birthed in WWE. As Stone Cold's rise in the WWE began to become bigger and bigger, they had to do something to put themselves over the top because WCW was still beating them in the ratings. Despite them believing that they had a better product, they were still getting smacked by Bischoff. And then they decided to go with an old trope. When in doubt, celebrities out. And they went for Mike Tyson. Now, Mike Tyson is a polarizing figure because Mike Tyson had some allegations of rape. He still was one of the biggest fighters in the world and one of the most well-known people in the world. So it was going to draw eyes regardless of how you felt about him. This wasn't the greatest match that they had at WrestleMania, but it did its job. Stone Cold Steve Austin was able to be put over, and Shawn Michaels did the job of passing the torch to Stone Cold Steve Austin. Eventually, what happened between Austin and Vince McMahon was the birth of the McMahon character, but also Stone Cold Steve Austin kind of coaxed it out of him. His anti-authority rhetoric and his incessant need to be not controlled by the corporate machine made him the badass that we all saw, and everybody in any other instance he would have been a bad guy. But because he was going up against Vince, somebody that was not well liked even within his own company, the fans hated him, they didn't give a shit about him. Everybody wanted Vince McMahon to get his comeuppance, so Vince played into the part of being the pathetic owner, but also of them being able to have the control that he wanted and what he wanted people to see. This was the birth of the back and forth of the true feud between Stone Cold Steve Austin and Mr. McMahon. And it led to a really long, grueling fight between these two men that I was young enough to witness. I remember when Stone Cold Steve Austin and Mr. McMahon was going at it. It was one of my favorite feuds of that era, and it obviously was the one that stood out the most to me because it was iconic. And Bischoff didn't really start quaking in his boots until Tyson came along, and then all of a sudden things started to shift in WWE. What they did was they started to use another old trope, which to use what was going on in the world at the time as a mirror to the WWE. So people wanted darker, edgier characters who were not worried about cookie cutter bullshit. They wanted people who reflected their sentiments, their attitudes, and their behaviors. In the movies that we saw, the guys who would normally be a villain were the guys who were actually the anti-heroes. And that is where I believe anti-hero type characters came into play, because Stone Cold Steve Austin was never a babyface and he never really was a heel, although there were some instances where he was a corporate stooge, right? But Stone Cold Steve Austin was the perfect example of what an anti-hero is. It's somebody who doesn't necessarily look the babyface cookie cutter part, but they are considered a hero because they have those relatable elements that makes them anti-establishment and really for the good of man. But they don't go out and say it. They do it in a shitty way that what most heels would do, but the anti-hero is able to do it under the cloak of still being a decent guy, but not really, because he's willing to get his hands dirty too, just for a good cause. You see what I mean? As the docu-series progresses, Vince talks about how he really enjoyed the heat and he enjoyed the character of Vincent Kennedy McMahon and how he was able to just draw the ire of the crowd, and he really enjoyed and lived for that, because that was the fun part, because he knew if he got you to be emotionally invested, then you were hooked, and that was a fun thing for him to do. But he said that he took the aspects of the things that he hated from people who thought they were better than him, because he grew up dirt poor. He grew up with nothing. And he experienced how rich people treated him, and he didn't like it. But he could fight, and he knew how to fight. And he would fight dirty. He would not fight fair, and he would win the fight, and they'd be like, that's not fair. You cheated. And he just goes, I won. That's all that matters. To be fair, just to play devil's advocate, when you're in the midst of a fight, all bets are off, babe. Nobody gets the upper hand over the other just because you're being an honorable fighter. You want to win, you whoop ass. That means picking up a chair and throwing it at the bitch head, this so be it. Now, I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just telling you that sometimes in the fight you have to do what you have to do to get a motherfucker off you, okay? Now, I'm not advocating for Vince McMahon and his behavior. I'm just giving you the truth, okay? Because I've been in fights before where I've had to do some things to get a bitch up off me, okay? But I've never went after somebody to hurt, maim, or any of those things. I was just protecting myself. I just want to make that very clear. So Vince was talking about he utilized the traits of the rich people that he didn't like and that looked down upon him, and that's what he used to embolden the character of Mr. McMahon. He was asked by the interviewer, so what aspects of your character do you actually like? And he says, none of them. I don't like any aspect of my character that I like. And everybody else is like, Mr. McMahon and Vince McMahon are one and the same. They are the same person. And Bruce Pritchard is like, I have been on the receiving end of this behavior before. Like, he said some of these things to my face that he's actually said on camera, in character. He's actually said these things to my face. And he goes, oh, I would never say anything like that. And Bruce is like, yeah, you have, Vince. You've said it to me, babe. It's interesting. It's almost as if Vince has another personality, because I don't believe that he actually believes that he is this dangerous monster. I think he believes he's more docile than what he is, but I think the line got blurred for him too, where he lost himself for a while in that character that he called Mr. McMahon. His son said it's an extension of him and is blown way out of proportion. But everybody else that worked for him said, oh, well, it's not that far blown out of proportion. After Stone Cold Steve Austin's meteoric rise, then you had the birth of The Rock and his rise in WWE. And they became this massive entertainment juggernaut. And I remember during that time, it wasn't just The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. It was Mick Foley. It was D Generation X. It was so many superstars. The Godfather with the whole train. You had women's wrestling that was booming at that point too, with Trish and Lita coming in later on down the line. And you had so much going on. And then the tag team division exploded with the Hardys, Edge and Christian, the Dudley Boys. Like, everything started to just really fall into place for WWE. And they were a well-oiled machine. And they were, that title fell between The Rock, Triple H, Stone Cold Steve Austin. It was a fucking race to see who was going to keep and get that title over and over and over again. It was wild. It was wild madness. And they were leaving WCW in the dust. And the reason why that was is because WCW fell victim to their own bullshit. They did not evolve like they should have. They started out really red hot. For 83 weeks, they were giving you everything. And then they rested on their laurels. They rested on Hulk Hogan and this NWO shit. They rested on all the superstars there joining NWO. And they rested and said, oh, we're going to have it. What are they going to do? Bring out the Brooklyn Brawler? No, they're going to watch what you do, revamp it, and do it better. And that's exactly what they did, because that's exactly what your ass did. You screwed yourself, Bischoff. And you're right. Vince McMahon took your character and he did it better than you. He took your concept of NWO and they did it better than you with DX. It appealed more to the 1835 demographic. They didn't take an old, aging wrestler and turn him into a heel so that he can draw ire, because just like in his hero days, he then faded into the black, no pun intended, because people got tired of his ass. The same thing happened over there in WCW. Only this time he was screwing over his own mates. But that's another conversation for another day. Girl, I'm on a roll today. Anyways, the phenomenon of what WWE's Attitude Era was able to do for entertainment in the 90s, it turned into, they were massive, popular superstars. They were everywhere. And it went from them being able to be like, hey, I know you, you're on TV, to them being mauled by people, them being seen and people going fucking crazy like they're movie stars or something. This was the birth of the WWE superstar, no longer the WWE pro wrestlers. But with great power comes great responsibility. And while Vince was enjoying his newfound resurgence to the top of the wrestling world, you have to understand that with all that wonderful, wonderful fame and fortune, there are going to come the doubters, the naysayers, and the pissed off people who don't want you to exist. In comes Phil Mushnick again. Phil seems to be very hyper-focused on Vinny. He is not ready to let this go, not even in the slightest. He has continued this crusade because he feels like Vince McMahon thinks he's above the law, or that he's above morality, which in some instances Vince does believe that. That actually is probably more true than it is not. But this question of whether wrestling or WWE specifically was, ruining the youth of America is very interesting question, because that is the same anger and frustration that they aimed at video games. That's the same thing they aimed at music, especially artists like Rage Against the Machine, Korn, just all of these new metal style bands that were making very angry but also politically acclaimed and political unrest style music that was very anti the establishment. WWE also created a world where the billionaire would get his comeuppance because he's an evil billionaire, and you got to watch that play out on TV. But they also created a world where storylines were outside the box, batshit bonkers, like X-Pac coming out in blackface. Literally painted himself dark brown, I'm assuming to mimic Mark Henry. Trying to understand how that was okay, but not even that, just little shit like the Kiss My Ass Club, which is not little, it's bullshit. He's like, nobody got raped, and like Vince was like, nobody got hurt and nobody got killed, and then they had a whole casket match where somebody was in a casket and they were using a damn sledgehammer on the casket. Nobody got R-worded, and then you see it and he's fucking calling somebody an R-word when they come out. And then they had like a pseudo castration moment where somebody's schlong may have gotten cut off. There have been multiple moments where shit is just weird. Part infinity. Like, I mean, the Godfather himself with the whole train was just exploiting women. It just was just gross. It was a gross moment. Val Venus, he was definitely the kind of guy that would not listen if you said no. He was not a consensual person, for sure. And then you had guys like Big Daddy V, and you had Mark Henry, who was like, I don't know, they called him Chocolate Lover or some stupid shit like that. I hated that storyline for Mark Henry. It just was gross. It just was a gross time. They were doing any and everything that they could to push the envelope. And in some instances, it worked. And in others, it was doing too fucking much. Like the one time where Triple H was like literally committing necrophilia. Or at least he made it appear that way. I mean, in this day and age, things have changed, right? But back then, it was Wild Wild West. They were the ratings kings. They could pretty much do whatever they wanted as long as it was within reason. It was on cable television, so they could low-key push the envelope on a lot of things. I think I saw Shawn Michaels' ass more than I should have, which is a strange thing to say. But I know exactly what Shawn Michaels' ass looked like back in the day, and I don't think I should know what his ass looked like. But I do. I vividly remember his ass cheeks. I sound really weird coming out, but I can't explain it any other way. So I apologize for the nasty visual or the happy visual, whichever works for you. But I am just saying I remember what this man's ass looks like because I've seen it too many times to count. So the WWE got into a lot of trouble. They were being targeted per se because the perception of their programming was not appropriate for children. Although they had switched who they were marketing their programming to, they still were selling toys, dolls, the big shots, plushy guys. They were still selling those things, and those things are usually marketed towards very young boys. But to be fair, and to play devil's advocate, this was the 90s. And in the 90s, a lot of things were pretty much considered okay. It's not okay. It wasn't okay, but it was given a green pass because there was no PC police during that time. It was pretty much you throw shit at the wall, it sticks, you keep going. And if you could keep doing what you're doing, do it. They didn't want to be the ones responsible for the role models that your kids idolize. They wanted you to raise your kids, which in fairness is a fair take. You can't tell me I shouldn't be on television because you don't want your kid running around saying suck it, but you don't have a problem with your kid tackling people every day because they seen somebody on TV do it watching football. Either way, you can get injured by doing it. And yet you have no problem with that because football is an American tradition. It's a pastime. It's a profession. Well, so is professional wrestling. It's an entertainment value. And while some of the antics in professional wrestling can be considered quite ignorant, there is a market for that type of entertainment, and it is not marketed towards children per se. And they're like, oh, well, grown men aren't buying dolls. You'd be fucking surprised what grown men are buying. I've seen grown men collect more action figures than a little bit, okay? So, yes, grown men are buying action figures. Grown men are buying those ring sets. Grown men are buying those big shots. There's a man right now who has a full-on collection of the original big shots, okay? So it's not that grown men aren't buying these toys, because men do buy these toys. Men do buy these collectibles. They do buy these things. It's that these toys were heavily marketed to children. So you'll have these toys, and in the commercial, there are young boys between the ages of 12 and 14 playing with the toys, not a grown man. You see what I'm saying? So from a marketing standpoint, they marketed the toys to the young kids, but they weren't marketing their programming to the young kids. Now, if they were sitting there watching it with their moms and dads, that's their business. I ain't gonna lie, I was watching it with mine. But when shit would go down. So anyways, as the doc progresses in this episode, they start to talk about how the women were treated and how they were objectified and often dehumanized in the Attitude Era. They were oogled and regarded for their looks, their boobs. It was a very rough time to be a woman in the WWE and in professional wrestling as a whole. women in wrestling were not respected. And it took a long while before they got to where they are now. And those pioneers like Victoria, Sable in some instances, Trish Stratus, and of course Lita, Jacqueline, um, Jazz, and so many others who were able to be the best version of themselves that they were allowed to be. But even after all of that, a lot of them were still objectified or sexually harassed. And most of this was done on screen. This was done on screen. So it was a rough time during the Attitude Era for the girls. Okay. These last minutes of this show is when they start talking about Owen Hart. I know the more they didn't go into detail about it, and they don't have Vince Russo on this doc, which is a little baffling because Vince Russo was an integral part of this Attitude Era, and he wrote a lot of the storylines, and he was one of the reasons why a lot of things went down the way that it did. And to this day, he takes no fucking responsibility for Owen Hart's death, and he definitely should. I remember on the Dark Side of the Ring doc when they did the Owen Hart special, and they talked about how Owen Hart was not given a proper harness. He was giving something that you would put like on a fishing boat to hold together lines, the little hooks. He was never given a real harness that would be used for someone who would rock climb or something like that. What he was given was flimsy. It broke. He fell, hit his face on the side of that ring, and he died. His blood stayed in that ring, and for whatever reason, they didn't think enough of Owen Hart to stop the show, or at least reset the mat, so that his blood wasn't still in the ring. It was Vince McMahon's call to continue the show, and in my opinion, he should have dropped the house lights, came out there, and told everyone that Owen Hart has unfortunately passed away. And due to the circumstances, we are going to shut down this show. We will refund all of your money, and we'll re-gift you tickets to the next PLE on behalf of the WWE. Whenever we come back, we will honor those tickets. And that's what he should have did. Even as a businessman, you got to draw the line somewhere. And he didn't. He kept the show going. And these wrestlers had to go out there while one of their colleagues and friends' blood was still in the ring, and they knew that he was dead at that point in time. Meanwhile, Bret Hart, he felt it in his heart that something was wrong. He knew that his brother had died. He was in the air flying to go somewhere, and they wrestled at Over the Edge while Owen Hart's blood was in that ring. It just was disrespectful. It was completely unnecessary, and it was out of line. Because when Chris Benoit murdered his family and himself, Monday Night Raw did not go on that week. As a matter of fact, they did a whole fucking episode of a tribute to him, not knowing what happened. They had no idea what he had done. And to their credit, they didn't know because they weren't informed, okay? But they did a whole episode with a whole tribute to him. And they ended up having to pull that episode. You can't see it. You can't even watch it anywhere. It doesn't come on anywhere. They did a whole episode, a whole 2-hour episode of Monday Night Raw, just tribute matches for Chris Benoit. But you couldn't stop the show for Owen Hart. You couldn't do that. And you wonder why the Hart family has no love lost for you in the WWE. Because you had no love lost for them and the loss that they suffered at your hands. This part is extremely disappointing. This documentary ended, or this episode of the doc ended with the conversation about, is it pushing the envelope too far? And in some instances, yes, they are pushing the envelope too far. People were getting set on fire. The women were heavily exploited, where their clothes are being ripped off on a consistent basis. I mean, it just was doing everything they could to keep themselves on top, but also to keep pushing the envelope to see how far they could go. And even The Undertaker said at some point, enough is enough. And when are we going to slow this down? I guess we'll see when the slowdown happens, because it eventually did come. I got 2 more episodes to go, and I really don't want to sit here for another 2 hours. But I gotta finish it. I have to finish it. I've been watching this for almost 5 hours, and I feel like my brain is turning too much. Y'all better be so lucky that I love y'all, because I do this for my people.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe for more wrestling content. Check out our merch and consider becoming a member for exclusive perks, special emojis, and members-only content.